On June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was sleeping in her bedroom in Federal Heights, Salt Lake City, Utah. She shared the room with her sister Mary Catherine, but their peaceful night was about to take a terrifying turn. A soft-spoken man armed with a knife climbed through their open window. This woke Mary Catherine, who pretended to be asleep, hoping to protect her sister. The man ordered Elizabeth to be quiet, threatening to harm her if she didn't comply. Terrified, Elizabeth put on her shoes and was taken outside. Mary Catherine waited 2 hours before waking their parents and Lois Smart. She told them someone had taken Elizabeth, but they didn't believe her at first, thinking she might be dreaming. However, after inspecting the bedroom and finding a cut window screen, they realized Mary Catherine was telling the truth. They immediately contacted the authorities, who arrived and questioned Mary Catherine about the kidnapper. Mary Catherine described the man as having dark hair on his head, arms, and hands. Although he spoke quietly, she recognized his voice as familiar, but couldn't remember where she had heard it before. The police used the Rachel alert system to broadcast information about Elizabeth's abduction to the public, seeking their help in finding her. As part of their investigation, the police looked into people who had toured the Smart family's home, which was for sale at the time. They also searched the family's computer to see if Elizabeth had interacted with anyone suspicious online. The day after the kidnapping, Ed and Lois Smart made a heartfelt appeal on national television, pleading for their daughter's safe return. The police searched all night for the suspicious individual, but couldn't find them, so they ruled out the tip as not credible. Another tip came from a milkman who claimed to have seen a man driving a gray Honda or Nissan on Elizabeth Street around the time of her disappearance. He wrote down the license plate number, but when the police checked, they couldn't find any information on it, so they dismissed the tip. Police investigation was complicated by the many people who showed up at the Smart residence soon after Elizabeth's abduction, which could have contaminated any potential evidence. They questioned a man who had contact with Elizabeth before her abduction, but he was released after they determined he wasn't involved. The search for Elizabeth continued, with over 20 volunteer pilots searching the Salt Lake area from the air, but they found nothing. Tracking dogs indicated they had smelled something in Red Butte Canyon, but the police search of that area yielded nothing. Elizabeth's father, Ed, was exhausted from the search and was hospitalized briefly, but he was determined to keep looking for his daughter. He and his wife, Lois, were barely holding on, but they believed Elizabeth was alive and would come home to them. Ed took a polygraph test to aid the investigation, and the police ruled out the possibility that Elizabeth had staged her disappearance or run away. Mark Claus, whose daughter was kidnapped and murdered, reached out to the Smart family to offer support and share his own experiences. He noted that the internet had helped spread the word about Elizabeth's disappearance, which increased the chances of finding her. The police received information about a man named Brett Michael Edmonds, who was seen in the area around the time of Elizabeth's abduction. They searched for him, but he had relocated to New Mexico and Texas. After a chase, they arrested a man they thought was Brett, but it turned out to be the wrong person. The police investigated a man who resembled a suspect in Elizabeth's case, but they determined he was not involved. Meanwhile, they found Brett Michael Edmonds in West Virginia, where he was hospitalized due to an overdose and liver failure. Despite his critical condition, was conscious and able to speak, allowing the police to question him about Elizabeth's abduction. A quick note before we continue. As you know, on Uncover Eyes, we release new videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel, also focused on real-life crime stories, called Secret Crime Mysteries. On the days we don't post videos on Uncover Eyes, we'll be uploading them on Secret Crime Mysteries. This means if you're looking for daily doses of astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. After interviewing him, the police cleared Brett as a suspect. The police then shifted their attention to Richard Albert Ritchie, a 48-year-old man who had worked at Ed Smart's home for 2 months the previous year. Ed Smart had hired Richard and even gave him a 1990 Jeep Cherokee in exchange for his labor, unaware that Richard had a long history of criminal offenses, including burglary, robbery, and attempted murder. Richard Ritchie denied any involvement in Elizabeth's abduction and claimed to have cooperated fully with the police, providing DNA samples and sitting through 26 hours of interviews. Despite an exhaustive search of his home, the police found no evidence linking him to the abduction. As the search for Elizabeth continued, the Smart family received a promising lead when a witness reported seeing a girl matching Elizabeth's description in Nebraska. However, after investigating the report, the police found no connection to Elizabeth's case. The Smart family remained hopeful but cautious, determined to find their daughter while acknowledging the possibility of false leads. They kept an open mind, knowing that every lead, no matter how promising, had to be thoroughly investigated before they could finally be reunited with Elizabeth. Richard Ritchie was accused of burglary, a second-degree felony, and theft, a Class A misdemeanor, for stealing items from a house in Federal Heights on April 4, 2001. He was also charged with theft, a third-degree felony, for stealing jewelry and a perfume bottle, worth $3,500 from the Smart house on June 6, 2001. However, these stolen items were not related to the investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping. Salt Lake District Attorney David Yoakum announced the charges in a press conference. When Ed Smart confronted Richard Ritchie about the Smart house theft, Ritchie denied it and was subsequently fired. Unfortunately, the police investigation into Elizabeth's abduction suffered a setback in August 2002 when Richard Ritchie, their prime suspect, died from a brainstem injury that caused hemorrhaging. As Ritchie's condition worsened, he lost the ability to communicate or breathe on his own. His family eventually decided to remove him from life support to prevent further suffering. Although Ritchie's death presented a significant challenge to the investigation, the authorities continued their efforts to find Elizabeth Smart's abductor. The investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping was hindered when the prime suspect was ruled out, causing doubts about the viability of other leads. Around the same time, in August 2002, an 11-year-old girl was brutally attacked and sexually assaulted in her own bedroom. The severity of her injuries was shocking, with every bone in the middle of her face broken. She required surgery, but remained in critical condition. The police arrested a close friend of her father, Javier Sickler, and charged him with burglary, assault, and attempted murder. Sickler claimed to have knocked on the front door of the victim's home, but said he blacked out afterward. Despite initial similarities with Elizabeth Smart's abduction, the police investigated and determined that Javier Sickler was not involved in her kidnapping. As the months passed with no sign of Elizabeth Smart, the police investigating her abduction turned to unorthodox methods to find her. One approach involved consulting psychics who claimed to possess extrasensory perception that could provide clues about her whereabouts. The psychics told investigators that Elizabeth might be found in a crypt in the foothills above Salt Lake City. This lead prompted a Seattle-based company to come forward, stating that over a dozen of its members had pinpointed Elizabeth's body using a specialized psychic technique called technical remote viewing. According to the group, their psychic abilities revealed that Elizabeth had been killed shortly after her abduction. However, when officers searched the specified tomb, they found no evidence of Elizabeth's disappearance. In November 2002, Walter Kenneth Holloway was arrested after falsely claiming to be the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. He contacted the Smart family and the Salt Lake Police Department, demanding a $3 million ransom from Ed and Lois Smart in exchange for their daughter's safe return. Holloway threatened to harm Elizabeth if his demands weren't met. However, the police quickly discovered that Holloway was not involved in the abduction and was simply trying to extort money from the Smart family. They tracked him down to South Carolina and cleared him of any involvement in the case. Ed Smart was outraged by the extortion scheme, feeling that it wasted valuable police resources and distracted them from finding his daughter. In October 2002, Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's sister, had a sudden realization. The voice of her sister's abductor sounded like Emmanuel, a man the family had briefly hired to do some yard work and roofing a year earlier. However, the police had doubts about this lead because Emmanuel had only worked for the family for a short time. A lot of time had passed since the abduction, and Mary Catherine had only heard the abductor's voice briefly. Despite their skepticism, the family worked with a sketch artist to draw a picture of Emmanuel based on their descriptions. The The sketch was finally released in February 2003 and was featured on several TV shows, including Larry King Live and America's Most Wanted. A relative of a man named Brian David Mitchell recognized the sketch and contacted the police, providing them with recent photos of him. These photographs enabled authorities to confirm that the sketch was an accurate representation of Brian David Mitchell. On March 12, 2003, two couples in Sandy, Utah spotted Brian David Mitchell with a woman and a girl. Recognizing him from news photos as Elizabeth Smart's abductor, they immediately called the police. Brian David Mitchell was accompanied by his wife, Wanda Barzee, when he was found with Elizabeth Smart. The police were quickly alerted and sent to the scene, where they safely rescued Elizabeth Smart and took Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee into custody. After her rescue, Elizabeth's testimony revealed a disturbing account of her 9-month ordeal. She described being taken to a hidden encampment outside Salt Lake City, where she met Wanda Barzee, who played a significant role in her captivity. The camp was a makeshift shelter surrounded by dense foliage, carefully camouflaged to avoid detection. Elizabeth Smart described Wanda Barzee as initially caring and nurturing, offering comfort and warmth. However, as time passed, Barzee's behavior changed, and she began to exert control over Elizabeth. She forced Elizabeth to follow their unusual religious beliefs, insisting that she pray, read scriptures, and participate in religious rituals. One of the most distressing experiences Elizabeth endured during her captivity was being forced to marry Brian David Mitchell. Barzee threatened Elizabeth with physical harm if she refused to comply. The wedding ceremony, which Mitchell claimed was a symbol of eternal love, was actually a sham with no legal basis. It solely served as a means for Mitchell to assert his dominance over Elizabeth. After being forced into a marriage, Brian David Mitchell assaulted Elizabeth. He justified his actions by claiming to be a king, ordained to kidnap virgin brides to fight against the Antichrist. Mitchell believed Elizabeth was the first of many virgins he would abduct, and that she would join him in this fictional battle. During her captivity, Elizabeth suffered unimaginable abuse to prevent her escape. She was chained to a tree with a metal cable, restricting her movement outside her tent. This constant confinement made her feel trapped and helpless, unable to seek freedom. In addition to physical restraint, Elizabeth was also subjected to psychological manipulation. She was forced to take on a new identity, choosing the name Esther after the biblical figure. This name change symbolized the loss of her own identity and the control exerted over her by Mitchell and his accomplice, Wanda Barzee. Elizabeth suffered severe trauma during her captivity, particularly due to the frequent and repeated sexual assaults by Brian David Mitchell, which occurred multiple times a day. This abuse left her deeply traumatized and fearful. In addition to the sexual abuse, Elizabeth was forced to look at explicit materials, which further worsened her trauma and feelings of degradation. Moreover, she lived in constant fear of violence and death, as Brian David Mitchell regularly threatened to kill her. This perpetual state of fear and uncertainty amplified the abuse she endured, leaving her feeling utterly overwhelmed and powerless. To gain more control over Elizabeth, Mitchell would often force her to consume alcohol and drugs. He used these substances to reduce her ability to resist him and make her more vulnerable to his control. As a result, Elizabeth was frequently disoriented and helpless, making it easier for her abusers to commit their atrocious acts. After a lengthy legal process, Wanda Barzee admitted to her role in Elizabeth's kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years in both state and federal prison, with the sentences to be served concurrently. In 2016, her federal sentence was terminated, and she was transferred from a Texas prison to a Utah prison to begin serving her state sentence. When Wanda Barzee was set to be released in September 2018, Elizabeth Smart, who had become a child safety advocate, strongly objected to her release. Elizabeth believed that Barzee still posed a threat to others, as she had never shown remorse for her actions or any signs of rehabilitation. Despite Elizabeth's protests, Wanda Barzee was released from prison. Elizabeth Smart's protest attracted extensive media attention and brought to light the ongoing concerns about the release of convicted criminals from prison. After a lengthy legal battle, Brian David Mitchell was finally sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping Elizabeth. At his sentencing hearing, Elizabeth took the opportunity to confront her kidnapper directly, delivering a powerful and emotional statement. In her statement, Elizabeth described the immense pain and trauma Mitchell had inflicted upon her, explaining that the 9 months she spent in captivity had stolen a part of her life that she could never recover. Despite this horrific experience, Elizabeth demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination, assuring Mitchell that she would go on to live a good life, unperturbed by the darkness he had brought into her world. The case of Becky Freedley. On September 17, 2006, at 9:51 p.m., a passerby saw large clouds of smoke in the distance and quickly called emergency services. The smoke turned out to be a fire at the Freedley family home. Firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, but it was too late. Becky Freedley, 53 years old, and her husband, John Hayward, 55 years old, had died. Forensic experts later revealed that Becky had been attacked in the head, and John had suffered injuries from being attacked in the chest. The case became even more grisly when the burned body of 18-year-old Becky Freedley, Becky's daughter, was discovered. Her body was found in a wheelbarrow outside the house, and experts have not been able to determine the cause of her death. The house that burned down belonged to Ron, who had built it for his family, including his wife Becky and their 3 daughters, Drew, Tanya, and Becky. He had chosen a safe and quiet location in the mountains to provide his daughters with space to play and entertain themselves. Becky was a devoted mother, teaching her daughters to cook and assisting them with household tasks. She enjoyed gardening, sewing, and preparing delicious meals. The family seemed happy, but over time, Ron and Becky grew apart. After 13 years of marriage, they divorced and Ron moved out, leaving the house to Becky and their daughters. Sisters Drew and Tanya eventually moved out of their mother's house, leaving their youngest sister Becky behind. Shortly after, Becky began a relationship with John Hayward, who also had an adult daughter. John moved into the Freedley home, and they all lived together until a tragic incident occurred in September 2006. Friends and acquaintances of the family were baffled by the crime, not knowing who could have committed it. Rumors spread throughout town, with some claiming that Ron was responsible for the fire. However, he denied any involvement and showed deep concern for Becky and his daughter, often crying during interrogations. His older daughters, Drew and Tanya, did not believe their father could commit such a horrific act. Investigators asked Ron to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to and passed successfully. Police later reviewed Ron's phone records and determined he was about an 11-hour drive from the scene of the fire, leading them to rule him out as a suspect. Further investigation revealed that the target of the case was Becky. Her father, Ron, shared that she had been terrified of fire since she was very young. Once, while her mother was cooking soup, Becky accidentally spilled it on herself, resulting in a 3rd-degree burn that left a permanent scar. Since then, she had experienced intense fear whenever she saw fire. Becky's friend Jenny McDaniel told the police that she believed Robert Pape was responsible for the incident involving the Freedley family. Burned photographs were discovered at the scene, including one of Robert's. He was Becky's ex-boyfriend. They had a seemingly happy relationship during their 1.5 years of dating in high school. However, Robert's behavior became increasingly concerning over time. He grew excessively jealous and controlling. About 10 months before the incident, when Becky was on holiday with a friend, he would call her 20 to 30 times a night, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. In January 2006, Becky broke up with Robert. He found a new girlfriend but continued to call her to control her, which only made things worse. She told Jenny that he had come to her home 3 weeks before the tragedy and threatened her with violence. He told her that he didn't want to share her with anyone and that she should belong only to him. However, she and Jenny didn't take his statement seriously, thinking it was just a joke. After her death, Jenny informed the police about everything, but it turned out that they were already watching Robert, and he was on the list of suspects. Robert and Kristen maintained that they were not at or near Becky's house the night of the fire. However, Kristen later shared a different version of incident. They tried to stop by Becky's house, but found it closed, They then went to Kristen's house, where they spent the day playing video games. After 7 p.m., they drove to the high school to attend a game, but no one confirmed that they were there that day. According to cell phone records, at 7:13 p.m., Robert was at a different location than the one he claimed on the road leading to Becky's house. Meanwhile, Kristen's phones were turned off from 7:30 p.m. to 7:32 p.m. At the time, Robert was married to a woman named Sarah, whom he began dating shortly after his split from Becky. He was actively involved in his church, helping others, while Sarah dedicated her time to animal welfare. Kristen was also married. His father, John Smith, described him as a noble man who had served his country for 5 years in an elite army regiment. He became a hero in Afghanistan after saving the lives of 3 fellow soldiers and received an award for his bravery. He also earned a medal for injuries sustained from shrapnel during a grenade explosion, which severely damaged his arm. In 2012, Private Detective Luis Bolanos, a longtime colleague of Ron, offered to help Ron solve the case. He accepted Luis's help because he had lost faith in the police's ability to find the culprit. Detective Luis spoke with Becky's close friends and family, including her sisters and colleagues, and uncovered new crucial information. Becky's cousin, Daniela, recalled that the day before the fire, she called him to say that Robert had come to her workplace at the cafe and started bothering her. They had a fight that day, and he was even thrown out of the cafe. Detective Luis has been gathering information about Robert and Kristen. Their friends describe them as good people, but when they are together, they create a dangerous relationship. They had a particular interest in fire. One friend shared a concerning incident in which they set her mattress on fire, leaving her frightened and angry with them. Investigators discovered that Robert had sent a disturbing text message to his girlfriend, Sarah, who was in a complicated relationship with another man. In the message, he suggested that if he knew where the other boy lived, they could professionally burn his house down. Investigators suggested that Robert and Kristen intended to confront Becky, and that Vicky and John happened to be there. Evidence showed that they attacked Becky near her house, forced her into a car, and set her on fire. Police found a business card with Kristen's DNA at the location where Becky was discovered. Inside the house, they attacked and killed Vicky along with John. They then set the house on fire and fled the scene. 6 months later, the district attorney's office subpoenaed Robert Pape and Kristen Smith, charging them with the crime. However, the families of Robert and Kristen remained skeptical about their involvement and decided to advocate for their release. Robert's attorney argued that the charges against him were based on hearsay and unreliable evidence. The lawyer claimed that Daniela had lied about Robert visiting her at work the day before the incident and that they had argued. Daniela's testimony could not be verified, and Robert's text message to Sarah about burning down her friend's house was simply a joke. The attorney also claimed that he was not jealous or controlling, that they had broken up, and that he was happy in his new relationship with Sarah. Kristen Smith's attorney contended that he had no motive to commit the crime, as Becky was neither his girlfriend nor a friend, and he held no ill feelings toward her. The attorney pointed out that the fact that Robert and Kristen did not use their cell phones that evening did not prove that they were at Becky's house, since they were playing games and did not have their phones with them. However, Robert's phone was recorded by cell towers as ringing at 7:13 p.m. near Becky's home. FBI experts noted that cell phones at high altitudes, like Becky's house, can sometimes connect to different towers. But this did not matter because there was physical evidence that Kristen was near her house, a business card with his DNA on it. His attorney countered that Becky could have taken the card from Kristen earlier and suggested that she might have lost it near her house during a walk. The attorney suggested that Becky's close friend, Javier, might be responsible for the Freedley family's deaths. Javier was the first person to inform the police that Robert and Christine were going on a hike with Becky. Friends of Becky said that Javier was in love with her and wanted a serious relationship, but she only viewed him as a friend. Robert and Christine's attorneys noted that there was evidence that Javier was near Becky's house that night, as he was tracked via a phone call. Additionally, Javier's father worked as an investigator in the district attorney's office, raising concerns about bias, but they asserted that Javier was not involved in the crime. Instead, he assisted the investigation and was cooperative throughout. It was revealed that Javier was indeed in the area that evening because he intended to join Becky for the hike with Robert and Kristen. However, when he called Becky to confirm, she told him not to come. After that call, he decided to turn around and go back home. The court proceedings continued, and Robert and Kristen remained in jail. Kristen's father visited him every Saturday. Soon, Kristen became a father, but missed the birth of his daughter, Zoe. Meanwhile, a new prosecutor took over the case and urgently called for the charges against Robert and Kristen to be dropped. Just 2 hours later, they were released. Robert was greeted by his family, including his parents and wife, Sarah. A year later, by the end of 2015, Robert and Sarah divorced. In June 2016, both Robert and Kristen were arrested again for the triple murder and arson of the Freedley house. This arrest was based on a witness who claimed that Kristen had confessed to him about the crime. Years later, in January 2018, forensic experts used modern technology to match fingerprints that had not been available in 2006. The trial for the case began in April 2018, where Robert and Kristen pleaded not guilty. The court proceedings lasted about a month, and the jury deliberated for 10 days before reaching a verdict. On August 10, 2018, nearly 12 years after the Freedle family was killed, Robert Pape and Kristen Smith were found guilty of a premeditated crime, and both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Min Lynn and his wife Yoon Lin, known as Lily, were doting parents, loving partners, and a hard-working couple. The pair had met in Sydney after migrating from China as students. They soon married and had 3 children, 2 sons, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, and an older daughter Brenda, who was 15. Brenda described her mother and father as very loving, attentive, and extremely hardworking, giving everything they could to their children. 12-year-old Henry loved sports, was a keen badminton player, and was very popular and outgoing. The youngest of the family, Terry, adored his older siblings and used to follow Brenda around everywhere. The Lynn family were very close, and the siblings shared a particularly tight bond. Min and Lily worked hard to give their 3 children the best life and education they possibly could. Min set up the Epping Central News Agency in 2002, which became a fast-growing and lucrative business, turning over more than $1 million a year. The news agency was always bustling and busy, and the Lynn family quickly became very well known and respected within the local community. The family lived on Boundary Road, in a nice suburb of North Epping. Lily's sister Irene also moved into Boundary Road with them. Irene worked part-time at the news agency to help Min and Lily. Min had bought his parents, Yang Fei Lin and Fei Ching Su, a new home about a 30-minute drive away from them. Min and Lily also lived a short walk away from Min's sister Kathy, her husband, Lien Binzi, known as Robert, who was previously an ear, nose, and throat specialist in China, and their son. Both Robert and Kathy migrated to Australia in 2002. On Friday, the 17th of July, the Lynn family went to Min and Kathy's parents' house for dinner. This was a regular weekly gathering, and everyone apart from Brenda was there as she was away on a school excursion. Henry's grandmother asked him to stay over that night. However, he declined due to having plans with his uncle Robert the following day to play badminton. Min left his parents' home at around 9 p.m. to deliver some newspapers for the following morning. Eventually, the whole family headed back to their home on Boundary Road. Early the following day, chatter amongst locals started. Min's news agency was unusually closed, and the newspapers had mounted up outside the store without being taken in. It was a busy Saturday morning, and Min not opening his agency without any warning was a cause for concern. Min's sister Kathy received a phone call from a worried customer asking what was going on. Following this, Kathy and her husband Robert headed straight over to the Lynn family home, less than a 5-minute walk away. At around 9 a.m., they reached the house and found the door was unlocked. Downstairs, everything appeared as expected. Nothing was disturbed, but the house was eerily silent, and no one was responding to Kathy and Robert's heading up to the second floor. However, it was a very different story. They were met with a terrifying sight. In the master bedroom lay Lily's body. She had been bludgeoned to death and the room was full of blood. Upon making their way through the rest of the upstairs floor, each room had an equally horrifying scene. Irene's body was found in her room, slumped against her bed. Min and Lily's two young sons, Henry and Terry, were also found dead in their bedroom across the corridor. Blood completely covered the walls, floors, and ceilings in each room, and the crime scene and the murders would go down as one of the most brutal in Australian history. Min Lynn, however, was nowhere to be found. Kathy dialed 000 for an ambulance. Towards the end of the call, a hysterical Kathy could be heard pleading with her husband, Robert, begging him not to leave her alone in the house. She was heard saying in Cantonese, "I am more scared than you are." But Robert insisted he had to go and pick up hers and her brother's parents, leaving a frantic Kathy in the house alone. Police and paramedics arrived on scene and were met with Kathy at the front door, screaming for help. Min was still unaccounted for, but on Kathy's advice, the police did a further search of the master bedroom and looked under the duvet. It was here that they finally found Min Lin's body. He too had met the same terrible end as his family. Robert, Kathy, Yang Fei Lin, and Feng Qingzhu were taken to hospital to be treated for shock. A short while later, Brenda, still away on her trip, decided to log into Facebook to catch up with things back home. Tragically, she learned what had happened to her family shortly after signing in. People began messaging her asking if she was okay and sending her articles that showed pictures of her house. At first, she thought they were all playing some sort of sick joke, but her school arranged for her to travel back to Sydney on the first available flight. After landing, she was met with Kathy and police officers, who confirmed the horrific news. The last time Brenda had seen her family was when her father dropped her off a few days prior to begin her school excursion. Not wanting to draw attention to anything in front of her friends, she and her father awkwardly said goodbye and parted ways. Brenda said, "To this day, my biggest regret was not hugging and telling him I loved him." Strike Force No Burn was a secret operation that was implemented to investigate the 5 murders, and pressure was on to solve a case that had become very high profile very quickly. The deaths of the Lynn family started dominating the media, with all outlets keen to get the next scoop or lead on the case. It was initially reported that it may have been a murder-suicide, and the police said this was a possibility that was being investigated. But judging by the severe injuries sustained from the lengthy attacks and the fact that the injuries were consistent across all 5 people in the house, this theory was quickly ruled out. Investigators noted several things about the crime scene. It appeared that whoever had gained access to the house knew the layout and was very comfortable with their surroundings. There were no signs of a break-in and nothing appeared to have been ransacked or stolen. The power to the house had been cut from the outside. Police quickly determined that due to there being no signs of a forced entry, whoever the killer was most likely had a key to the property. 15-year-old Brenda's bedroom was completely untouched and unlike the other bedrooms, which showed blood on all the door handles. Her door handle was clean. This further fueled the police's theory that whoever had committed the crime knew the family and therefore knew Brenda was not there, deliberately avoiding that specific room. It was also determined that it was likely the killer had been wearing gloves due to the way the blood was smeared and spread. Officers quickly concluded that there was only one perpetrator, and although there were 24 bloody footprints found, they were all the same size and make of shoe. The prints were between a US size 8.5 and a 10. The family were all so disfigured from the attacks that forensic analysis had to be used to formally identify them. It was determined that the murders had taken place between 2 and 5:30 a.m. Police believe that Min and Lily were killed first and Irene was killed after, before the killer went into the young boy's room last. Detectives concluded that the 2 young brothers most likely woke up after hearing their parents and aunt being killed. Experts also confirmed that due to the blood splatter analysis and the position the boys were found in on the floor, they had fought for their lives with everything they had. Henry was killed with 3 blows to the head. Terry was the only one not killed instantly and potentially stayed alive for up to 2 hours after the attack, which ultimately saw him struck 6 times. Blunt force trauma was listed as the cause of death, and with 4 out of the 5 victims, asphyxiation was also a contributing factor. A distinct pattern was visible on the family's faces, and a forensic pathologist determined that a hammer-like object with a rope around it was the murder weapon they were looking for. It was likely that the killer wrapped the rope around their wrist during the attacks. Over the following days, police brought Robert and Kathy in for interviews. Robert held his head in his hands through most of the interviews, crying and staring down at the table. Through his translator, he told the police that he and his wife Kathy had left hers in Min's parents' house the previous night. When they got back home, he'd watch sports before having a bath at around 2 a.m. After this, he headed to bed. He then described the following day. 3 weeks after the family were killed, business at the Epping Central News Agency resumed. Kathy and Robert took over the ownership of the store and became Brenda's legal guardians. Robert offered to adopt Brenda a matter of hours after her parents were found. The funeral for the Lynn family was held in August. Hundreds of mourners turned up to pay their respects, including the children's school and the police looking after the investigation. The outpouring of grief was immense. A trust fund was set up to help Brenda with her future education, and the public came out in force to show their support for the family. As well as family and friends of the Lynns, the community wanted answers and justice too. Strike Force Nobun and the investigating team began to draw some conclusions. The lack of a break-in indicated the killer had a key, and the fact this person knew the layout of the house, including how to cut the power from the outside. The killer's knowledge that Brenda was not home, hence the reason her room was left undisturbed, and the shoe prints that covered the house, pointed to just one person. Robert the 000 call Kathy had made to authorities that morning also added more weight to this case. During the call, Kathy could be heard talking in Cantonese, begging Robert not to leave her alone in the house. For all anybody knew, the killer may still have been lying in wait somewhere, or may have potentially come back at any time. Despite her pleas, Robert left her for an hour to pick up her parents. Police concluded that only he would have known for definite that his wife was no longer in danger of meeting the same end as her family, hence the reason he left her. It was also alleged that when Kathy and Robert first went to the Lynn family home at 9 a.m. that morning, Robert told Kathy, "Don't look," before they could even see anything, indicating he already knew the scene that lay ahead. But police needed more before they could make an arrest. As Brenda was now living with Kathy and Robert, police set up pinhole surveillance cameras inside the couple's home. They had conducted a risk assessment to determine whether or not Robert posed any threat towards Brenda, and ultimately they determined he did not. Robert would have known Brenda's schedule and therefore could have easily waited for her to come home before carrying out the murders. But he didn't. Further analysis of the Lynn's house found that the bloody shoe prints at the scene were from a make of a 6 trainer, the same trainers that Robert could be seen wearing in old photographs. Observing more from within Robert and Kathy's home, police made another big link to the shoes in question. Robert was seen on one of the cameras talking to Kathy at the dining table. Whilst talking, he could be seen cutting a box into small pieces. He then soaked the pieces in a bucket before flushing them down the toilet. The box was an A6 trainer's shoe box, and the shoes in question were found out to be a men's US 9.5. Robert also made a curious phone call to a detective. He phoned to clarify something he may have said back when the Lynn family were discovered. He said he may have told a police officer at the scene that there were 5 bodies inside the house, but he claimed what he meant to say was that there were 4 or 5 bodies and that he was phoning to clear this statement up. This only added more to the police's case. Although Min was the last to be found inside the house, police believed it was obvious that Robert knew exactly where he was and had slipped up when he said 5 bodies, during a time when the 5th victim couldn't be accounted for. It wasn't long before police began a thorough search of Robert and Kathy's home and seized Robert's car. The couple had both confirmed in previous interviews that on the morning the family were discovered, they had both been up early. Robert told the police he had spent the morning in his garage. Knowing this, police were keen to search that particular space. During the search of the garage, a stain was found on the floor, and this was labeled up as stain number 91. Experts believe this was a transfer stain and it contained a mixture of DNA. It was quickly sent away for testing. After the results came back, it was concluded that stain 91 contained DNA from 4 out of the 5 victims. It matched 9-year-old Terry with a 1 in 50 quadrillion chance of the DNA belonging to anyone else. Following this huge discovery, At 9 a.m. on May 5, 2011, Robert Z. was arrested for the murder of his extended family. He applied for bail, but this was denied. Although Kathy had confirmed Robert's alibi for that night, saying he didn't leave their bed, it is believed that Robert sedated her before leaving early that morning, sometime after 2 a.m. He then headed over to the Lynn's house with a key that had been cut. It was also concluded that Robert killed each member of the family in the order in which they presented a threat for resistance or detention. It is thought that the two boys and Irene were collateral damage or secondary victims who may have woken up when Min and Lily were being killed. Police phoned Brenda's school, and she was quickly pulled into the principal's office and told the news about her uncle's arrest. Brenda's principal, Susan, said she herself had become suspicious of Robert when she witnessed him reducing Brenda to tears in the schoolyard. She said he was so physically close to her, speaking loudly, rapidly in Chinese. Brenda with her head down, tears falling down. It was clear that he was trying to get her to agree to something. I told my husband, I think I've just spent all day with a murderer. I just got a gut feeling he was dangerous, and I was very worried for Brenda's safety. Susan was so concerned that she eventually persuaded Brenda to obtain a lawyer. Brenda's lawyer soon began to suspect Robert as well. At this time, Brenda did not think it was possible that her uncle could have ever been involved. For a lot of people, the motive remained unclear. It was initially thought that Robert's motive stemmed from nothing more than jealousy and greed. Since coming to Sydney, he had been virtually unemployed after a restaurant venture he had failed. Police also found no evidence to suggest that he was actually an ear, nose, and throat specialist back in China. His brother-in-law Min was a successful businessman by this point, and police believed that Robert's jealousy of Min consumed him. Robert believed he was entitled to respect and admiration from his extended family, but felt he was denied it because of the attention given to Min. In December 2012, Robert was committed to stand trial. Some of the DNA evidence was still in the process of being tested, and the trial was delayed and pushed back. But in May 2014, the trial of Robert Z. began. He pled not guilty. Since July 2011, Robert had been sharing details with a fellow inmate who subsequently reported this back to police. The informant took the stand to testify against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence. The inmate, known as Witness A, said that Robert had told him he had bought a hammer, which was the murder weapon, from a $2 shop, as he knew the CCTV cameras in the shop were fake. He also alleged that Robert had said he'd planned to steal a dead man's DNA from a funeral home and plant it on the murder weapon. Witness A said Robert told him that on the night of the murder, he had sedated Kathy before leaving the house. Despite Witness A pushing Robert to find out where the murder weapon was, to this day it has never been located. It is thought that on the morning Robert drove to pick up Yang Fei Lin and Feng Qingzhu, he took the murder weapon with him and disposed of it along the way. Robert's defense team stated that it would have been impossible for one person to commit all 5 murders and escape unharmed. They also argued that Robert was not the only person living in Australia that wore size 9.5 A6A trainers. They stated that there was potentially 3 different sets of shoe prints at the crime scene, not just one. During the trial, Brenda, who was faced with all of the evidence against her uncle, said she finally had to accept the reality of what he had done to her family. Brenda's identity was kept hidden during the trials. She spoke to her lawyer and gave him evidence that added even more to an already shocking story. She told her lawyer and later the New South Wales Supreme Court that Robert had sexually assaulted her on a number of occasions before the murders. After she moved in with him and Kathy, the assaults began to escalate. The Lynn family estate, which likely would have gone to Brenda, was now being controlled by Robert and Kathy, and Robert evicted Min and Kathy's parents from the home that Min had bought for them. This added more weight to the theory that he was so fixated with Brenda. He did everything in his power to make sure she would be left with no choice but to move in with him and Kathy. While observing the family through pinhole cameras, police did observe Robert touching Brenda in what they called an uncomfortable way. But police said the touching they observed didn't amount to molestation. Brenda's grandfather Yang Fei Lin told the court that he had seen Robert staring into Brenda's bedroom during the early hours one morning. The juries in all of the trials knew Brenda's evidence, but journalists could not publish anything that identified her. She was referred to as Miss AB. After Brenda told the courtroom about the abuse she had suffered, She said that her Aunt Kathy began sending Brenda messages, proclaiming that Robert had been framed by the police and that everyone had it all wrong. Brenda spoke of how disappointed she was in Kathy's reaction. After the accounts of sexual abuse were brought to light in the courtroom, Justice Johnson declared a mistrial. A new trial had to be set for August 2014. On the first day of the second trial, the prosecution presented a new theory behind Robert's motive. As well as his jealousy of Min, he evidently had a disturbing sexual obsession with Min's daughter Brenda. But unfortunately, not long into the second trial, Justice Peter Johnson fell ill, and the trial again was postponed. 6 months later, in February 2015, Robert's third trial began. Justice Elizabeth Fullerton was now presiding, and the trial went on to last for 10 months. The jury took 19 days to deliberate. However, they could not reach a unanimous verdict, and it was again declared a mistrial. Justice Fullerton granted Robert bail while he awaited his next trial. After almost 5 years behind bars without a conviction, he was fitted with an electronic monitor and allowed back home. In June 2016, the fourth and what would be the final trial began. With Justice Fullerton still presiding, and 8 months later, in February 2017, the jury had reached their verdict. Robert was found guilty by a majority verdict of 11-1. Kathy and Min's parents said they were happy with the verdict they had waited so long for. Justice Fullerton said of Brenda, "I acknowledge the profound grief she has suffered and continues to suffer. While the law does not permit a sentencing judge to take into account any additional penalty, because a family member of a murder victim has suffered through their death. In this case, the far-reaching and immeasurable harm done is also an aspect of the harm done to the community, and for that reason, I also take that into account when imposing life sentences in this case." Robert was given 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. It would be years before the suppression order that concealed Brenda's identity was lifted, when she agreed to appear in an exclusive interview with Channel 7. Robert's wife Kathy still believes he is innocent and said that he is a caring man who would never hurt the family. Kathy and Min's parents, however, agree with the rulings and believe that Robert is now where he belongs, saying, "He is not a human being, he is a monster." Robert appealed his sentences in June 2020, but in 2021, after just 10 minutes at the New South Wales Criminal Appeals Court, 3 judges dismissed his appeal. In her interviews, Lynn said she is still trying to rebuild her life as best she can. She credits her amazing family with making her the person she is today, and she said she is forever grateful for how the community came together to help her. She wants to make sure she carries on doing all the things she knows her family would have wanted her to do, and said she hopes in the future she is able to do something to help other people and give back to everyone that supported her. The case of Richard and Carla Van Dusen. In many cases, even the most trustworthy and kind individuals who show no signs of criminal or malicious behavior can become entangled in criminal cases. Their kindness and trust are sometimes exploited by dangerous individuals in society, leading to crimes that are beyond imagination. Carla Van Dusen was born on September 20th, 1954. From a young age, she was easygoing, quiet, hardworking, and diligent in her studies. She married early, hoping for a happy family life, but her dreams of stability were shattered. Her first husband was cruel and manipulative, exerting total control over her. Carla was trapped in the relationship, unable to leave for a long time due to fear of his unpredictable and abusive behavior. When she finally managed to escape this nightmare, she was left with deep emotional scars and a lingering mistrust of others. However, one bright spot emerged from her first marriage, the birth of her son. Carla and her son shared a close and loving bond, and he became a true source of strength for her as she navigated the challenges of life. After her divorce, Carla lost interest in relationships with men and devoted herself entirely to raising her son. Years later, once her son was grown, she began to heal and decided to give her personal life another chance. This change was largely influenced by the persistence of a new suitor. Fate brought Carla together with Richard, a 55-year-old man with 2 daughters from a previous relationship. They met in 2000 when Carla was 46 years old. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within a few months, they decided to get married. For Carla, it felt like a miracle. She had nearly given up hope of finding her soulmate, but believed she had finally gotten lucky with Richard, who seemed like the perfect partner for the rest of her life. At that time, worked part-time as a court stenographer, spending most of her free time with family and volunteering. Richard's daughters and Carla's son got along well, and everything appeared to be going smoothly. On November 27, 2003, a local businessman on Old Memorial Highway encountered a disturbing scene. He noticed a suspicious car parked across from his store. At first glance, it looked as though the vehicle had been abandoned in a hurry. Inside the car, he spotted a woman's handbag carelessly thrown on the floor. The windshield on the passenger side had a circular hole, as if it had been cut. What stood out the most were small reddish spots scattered across the front seats, resembling blood. Alarmed, he immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they found the vehicle unlocked and began examining its contents. Inside the woman's purse, they found documents, money, and personal belongings, some of which were scattered on the ground near the car. A mobile phone was also discovered nearby. Using the documents in the purse and the phone records, authorities identified the vehicle as belonging to the Van Dusen couple. While contemplating their whereabouts, the officers heard someone calling for help from hundreds of meters behind the road embankment. A person was frantically signaling and urging them to contact the police. Guided by this witness, the officers followed him to the scene. On a secluded, forested dirt road a couple of kilometers from the highway, the witness had stumbled upon two bodies. Spotting the police, he began shouting for help. Even a cursory inspection allowed officers to identify the victims as Richard and Carla. Both had attack wounds to the head by weapon. Police immediately launched an investigation. Detectives quickly determined that both victims were respectable individuals with no ties to crime, mental illness, or dangerous addictions. They also found no evidence suggesting Richard and Carla had any enemies. The investigation faced challenges due to the abundance of clues left behind, but this offered hope for identifying the perpetrator. The case grew more complex due to the distance between the bodies and the car, which indicated a struggle had taken place. It was evident that Richard had attempted to flee from the attacker but failed. Investigators believe the assault began inside the car, suggesting the perpetrator was already present in the vehicle. Richard either ran out of the car or was pulled out, after which the attacker beat him. Relatives and friends of the victims supported this theory, as Richard and Carla had never argued, let alone become violent with each other. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the car and the condition of the bodies. Their analysis revealed that Carla was inside the car during the attack. The bullet passed through her hand and head, killing her instantly. Richard, her husband, was attacked outside on the street and attacked in the head. Carla's body was then dragged next to Richard's body. Richard and Carla was found hundreds of meters away from their family car. These findings ruled out the possibility of a self-harm or one spouse killing the other. Evidence clearly pointed to the involvement of a third party. During the investigation, police learned that the Van Dusens had lost a car. The forensic experts discovered a driver's license at the scene. It belonged to a man named Henry Sullivan, a Florida resident with a criminal record, which immediately raised police suspicions. A database search revealed that Sullivan had a history of criminal activity, including possession of controlled substances, probation violations, and 2 aggravated assaults. His violent past made detectives believe they were on the right track. Investigators decided to locate and question Henry Sullivan in person. When the police arrived at Sullivan's apartment building, they immediately noticed something unusual: a bright red Chevrolet Cheyenne parked nearby. The car stood out in the impoverished neighborhood as it was relatively new. When officers ran the license plate, they discovered the car belonged to the Van Dusens. The evidence against Sullivan seemed to be mounting. Detectives confronted him about the double homicide, catching him completely off guard. Sullivan denied any involvement, claiming he had no idea why the restored car was on his street. He even insisted he didn't have the car keys. However, he couldn't explain how his driver's license was found just meters away from the murder victims. The investigators were unsure if he was truly the killer. There seemed to be no clear motive for the crime. Carla and Richard were kind, hardworking people with no known enemies. Richard worked as a sales manager for a copier company and spent his free time restoring old cars, which he would sell before starting new projects. Carla worked as a stenographer and was deeply involved in her community. She sang in the church choir, volunteered at hospitals, and even dressed as a clown to entertain sick and injured children. Both were well-liked and respected in their city. Neither had ever been involved in violence or cruelty. The reason for such a brutal attack on these decent people remained a mystery. Sullivan claimed his license might have been stolen, explaining that he was often forgetful and had lost his expired license. When the police examined the document, they found no fingerprints on it, as if it had been deliberately cleaned. This was unusual because if Sullivan had dropped it accidentally, his fingerprints should have been present. This raised the possibility that someone had stolen Sullivan's license and planted it at the scene to frame him. The fingerprint analysis posed significant challenges. Forensic experts thoroughly searched the car, focusing on areas such as the door handles, back seat, and seatbelts, but they found almost no traces of evidence. It appeared that the crime scene had been meticulously cleaned, leaving little to no clues behind. Initially, it seemed as though the killer had left no evidence at all. However, police discovered the bullet that killed Carla from a 9mm pistol. Coincidentally, Sullivan owned 2 weapons of this caliber. While one of them was inoperable, the other could have been the murder weapon. Forensic scientists examined the functional weapon in the lab, which Sullivan voluntarily handed over, claiming it would prove his innocence. A ballistic analysis was conducted to compare the bullets from Sullivan's weapon with the one recovered at the crime scene. After tests the confiscated weapon, experts concluded that it did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, detectives did not want to discard this option completely since Sullivan had a criminal past, including one related to violent crimes. Investigators also considered the possibility that Sullivan was being framed or that he was not directly involved in the double murder. On the day of the murder, Richard and Carla had been planning to sell one of Richard's collectible cars, the red car found near Sullivan's home. The sale of the car would have involved a significant amount of money, which could have served as a motive for the crime. Forensic experts then turned their attention to analyzing blood droplets found at the scene, hoping to identify the killer's DNA. Their analysis confirmed that Carla had died inside the car. Inside the vehicle, only Carla's blood was discovered, while outside, only Richard's DNA was present. This information helped clarify the sequence of events. Initially, no evidence of a third party was found in the collected samples. However, when forensic experts examined blood traces from the car's steering wheel, they determined that the blood belonged to a third person. This revealed that someone else had taken control of the vehicle and driven it. Investigators speculated that the perpetrator might have injured his hand during a struggle or while cutting the seatbelt, leaving his blood on the steering wheel and he without realizing it. Now Detective Sullivan and requested his DNA samples. To compare with the evidence found in the victim's car, Sullivan agreed, confident he had nothing to hide. The test results confirmed that the blood found did not belong to him. So Sullivan was removed from the list of suspects. The investigators began to suspect that the license had been deliberately faked by someone in Sullivan's close circle, a ruthless individual with a history of violent crimes. Their focus shifted to Sullivan's brother, Justin. It was soon revealed that Justin had an outstanding arrest warrant for an unrelated case. On the night of the murders, Justin was stopped by a traffic officer for a violation. To avoid arrest, he gave Sullivan's name instead of his own, knowing the officer wouldn't verify his identity. The officer let him off with just a warning. Later, Justin likely stole Sullivan's documents and planted them at the crime scene to frame him for the murders. He had ample opportunity to do so and could have bolstered the police's suspicions about Sullivan's involvement by planting Richard's car outside Sullivan's apartment. As a result, Justin became the new prime suspect and was brought in for questioning. He denied any role in the double murder and provided an alibi. Justin claimed he was at a nightclub with friends on the night of the incident, while several witnesses supported his story. Detectives suspected the friends might have lied or confused the date. The police then requested a DNA sample from Justin to compare with traces found on the car's steering wheel. However, the DNA profiles did not match. With the investigation at a standstill, detectives decided to revisit the case from the beginning, focusing more on Richard's car. While investigators were working outside, a man approached them on the street. He introduced himself as William de Pervine and claimed ownership of the car. William explained that shortly before the crime, he had purchased the vehicle from a collector. He said he had seen an advertisement for the retro car in a newspaper and went to Richard's home to inspect it. After being satisfied with the car, William paid Richard $6,500 in cash and took the car home. According to him, he had not seen the previous owners since the purchase and was unaware of anything happening to them. William did not arouse suspicion at first. He was a confident and well-educated law school graduate who even presented the contract and receipt signed by Richard. The documents clearly confirmed the car purchase. However, detectives decided to investigate further, and inconsistencies quickly surfaced. Witnesses revealed that shortly before the double murder, Richard and Carla had indeed found a buyer for the car. Richard was offered $13,500 for the vehicle, twice the amount William claimed to have paid. This made it clear that selling the car to William for $6,500 would not have been a profitable deal. With these revelations, detectives had new doubts, and William became a key suspect in this murder. He was called to the station for further questioning. William complied and admitted to meeting the Van Dusens at around 5:30 p.m. However, evidence soon contradicted his claim. Detectives discovered from phone records that Carla had spoken to her mother at 6:37 p.m. During the call, Carla mentioned they had found a buyer willing to pay a substantial amount and were planning to finalize the paperwork. Although she didn't name the buyer, she said the deal was agreed upon and they had plans to meet later. So at 5:30 p.m., it was impossible for Richard and Carla to have sold the car to William. After the phone conversation ended, Carla's mother couldn't stop wondering, why would anyone arrange to buy a car so late in the evening? The next day, Richard and Carla was found dead. Carla's mother was tormented by the thought that she might have been able to save her daughter. She was convinced the crime was connected to the car. When William was informed of these details, he appeared confused but stuck to his original account. He denied being the person Richard and Carla was supposed to meet that evening. This created a major inconsistency in his story since the timelines didn't match. Of course, the Van Dusens could not have sold the same car twice. Investigators later found that the psychological profile of William matched the description of the person who killed Richard and Carla. They also discovered that William had a history of violent crimes. At the time of the double murder, he was out on parole after serving 9 years for assault with a weapon. This criminal background further heightened the detective's suspicions about his involvement. The contract and receipt for the car sale were examined, and an expert confirmed that Richard's signature had been forged. Following this, William was asked to provide a DNA sample for analysis. However, he unexpectedly refused and invoked his rights without providing any explanation. At that point, the investigators did not have enough legal justification to forcefully obtain a DNA sample from the potential perpetrator. As a result, the detectives decided to pursue an alternative approach. That same day, a special team was assembled to monitor William's movements in hopes of finding an opportunity to collect the required DNA evidence. William was placed under 24/7 surveillance, and the police tracked his every move. This was challenging because he avoided public places like shopping centers and cafes, where it would have been easier to leave traces. His cautious behavior made the surveillance team's work even more difficult, as they had to carefully avoid detection. Being well-versed in criminal law due to his legal education, William was familiar with law enforcement techniques. During a previous term of imprisonment, he had dedicated time to studying and enhancing his knowledge of the legal system. William's university professors described him as highly intelligent, determined, and self-confident. His every action was meticulous and deliberate, reflecting a disciplined nature that aroused further suspicion. He constantly appeared tense, as though he feared being observed, which seemed to align with the theory of his involvement in the double murder. The police had been surveilling him for a long time. He followed the same schedule daily, going to work and returning home at the same times, rarely leaving his apartment. On weekends, he occasionally went to the store, but he appeared to have no friends and minimal contact with the outside world. The only social interactions he seemed to maintain were periodic meetings with his 2 daughters. His rigid routine, lack of social connections, and cautious behavior made it difficult for the authorities to collect DNA samples. After months of surveillance, detectives still lacked the crucial DNA evidence they needed. However, the suspect eventually made a critical error. During his Christmas shopping, he bought an ice cream and stopped at a shopping center food court. After finishing it, he threw the cup and stick into a trash can. Undercover officers retrieved the discarded items and secured the ice cream stick, which they sent to the lab. There, they successfully extracted a DNA sample from William. The results confirmed what investigators suspected. The genetic profile matched the blood found on Richard's car steering wheel. This proved that William was responsible for the crime. With this undeniable evidence, police arrested and charged William with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Despite substantial evidence against him, William steadfastly denied his guilt, claiming that Henry Sullivan was the true killer. During interrogation, however, his story began to shift, seemingly in an attempt to mislead the investigation. He admitted to meeting Richard and Carla the night before the murder, but claimed it was only to purchase a collector's car, after which they supposedly parted ways. Although he made slight adjustments to the timeline, his account became increasingly less credible. Despite this, William continued to insist that he did not shoot Richard and Carla, describing the car transaction as an ordinary purchase. The prosecution built its case on testimony from Carla's mother, who stated that her daughter had called her shortly before meeting William. Meanwhile, the defense lawyer argued that the genetic analysis used in the investigation had a margin of error, though it was so minimal that it did not affect the results. A second analysis was conducted, which confirmed William's involvement in the murders. Meanwhile, the defense attorney continued to focus on Sullivan, pointing out that his driver's license had been found near the crime scene. However, this line of defense ultimately failed, as no evidence, fingerprints, or other traces of Sullivan were found at the scene. The prosecutor's office presented a detailed account of the events from that tragic night. According to their findings, William met Richard and Carla and agreed to take a ride in a collectible Chevrolet Cheyenne to test its performance. He managed to lure the couple into their family car. Once there, he manipulated the situation to gain access to their vehicle. Instead of paying for the car, William pulled out a weapon and attacked Carla. Richard fled into the street, but William pursued and attacked him. After killing Richard, William cut Carla's seatbelt and dragged her body to where her husband's lay. During this process, he injured himself, leaving traces of his blood on the steering wheel. He then drove the victim's car to a store parking lot, abandoned it, and calmly returned home in the collectible Chevrolet Cheyenne. William had meticulously planned the crime, intending to frame a neighbor, Sullivan, who had a criminal record for violent offenses. Believing Sullivan's history would draw attention from the authorities, William planted Sullivan's license at the crime scene, ensuring it was wiped clean of fingerprints. However, his efforts backfired. Thanks to modern DNA evidence, William's scheme unraveled. During the trial, the prosecutor depicted the defendant as a cold and dangerous criminal who would commit double murder for just a few dollars. They described him as a serious threat to society. Despite this, the defendant adamantly claimed innocence and even requested to speak in his defense. However, the prosecutor intensified their efforts and dismantled all of his arguments. They presented extensive evidence against William, including the results of forensic examinations, DNA tests, shoe prints found near the victims' bodies, tire tracks from the red Chevrolet at the crime scene, and forged signatures on a sales contract. After deliberating for 3 hours, the jury found William DeParvin guilty of double murder. He was sentenced to death. In 2005, he was placed on death row. However, this was not the end of the case. William's lawyer filed multiple appeals and eventually identified a legal loophole. It was revealed that the death sentence had not been decided unanimously by the jury. Recent changes in Florida's criminal law required a unanimous jury vote for a death sentence to be carried out. Due to this error, a retrial was scheduled for 2022. Within weeks, the jury began deliberating the verdict. They spent time reviewing the case details. Although the prosecution recommended the death penalty, the jury failed to reach a unanimous decision. Under state law, this resulted in the death penalty being overturned. Instead, William was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison without any possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was announced in court, while his 2 adult daughters cried. Central High School, Knoxville, Tennessee. The football stadium lights up and the energy is high as everyone turns up to support their home team, the Bobcats. The marching band and cheerleaders keep the entertainment going and the energy up for the crowd. Some say the school revolves around football and the community spirit is always strong when the team plays. In the autumn of 2014, there was a new cheerleader on the team. 14-year-old Emma Walker was the only freshman to make the team that year. Described as passionate, spirited and fun with an infectious smile, Emma threw herself into cheerleading and took it very seriously. She adored being in that environment. She was kind, caring and high-achieving with hopes of one day becoming a neonatal nurse, caring for sick or premature newborn babies. One evening while Emma was cheering, she caught the attention of Central High's wide receiver, William Riley Gall, known as Riley. He spotted her from the sidelines and the attraction between the pair was instant. Riley, 2 years her senior, was also a top-performing and popular student. He was a member of the community church, loved video games, and his friends said he was a bit of a joker and not at all the stereotypical jock type. At the time, was already in a relationship, but he soon broke it off to begin dating Emma. The football star and cheerleader became the quintessential popular high school couple. Riley clicked with Emma's family. Her parents said he was like the boy next door, polite, well-mannered, and likable. But their attitude quickly changed when they found out that Riley was keeping his promise to take his ex-girlfriend to the junior year prom. And then he was taking Emma to the senior year prom. This didn't sit well with Emma's parents, and they were concerned that his priorities didn't lie with their daughter. But Emma wasn't concerned. Her social media account was often flooded with pictures of the young couple. The pair would upload loving photos and silly selfies. Emma's friends, however, said they didn't find it easy to get to know Riley, but thought this was down to him being shy and more reserved. But as time passed, friends of Emma said they stopped justifying his behavior and started to find it a bit more concerning. Many of Emma's friends said it became obvious that Riley didn't want Emma engaging with anyone that wasn't him. He became controlling, possessive, and jealous. Emma's friends voiced their concerns, but Emma brushed it off and told them they didn't need to worry. Emma's parents took away her phone in a bid to stop the toxicity, but Riley gave Emma an iPod Touch, so she was able to secretly text him through the Wi-Fi without her parents suspecting anything. For the next 2 years, Emma and Riley would be on and off numerous times, and relationship was becoming more toxic and tumultuous. Each breakup was more dramatic than the last, and the young pair would frequently get into nasty arguments. Riley would send message after message and call her constantly. He was always bombarding her, waiting outside her work for hours until she finished. He once said to her, "You're dead to me. I'll check the obituary." But for every nasty message, it would soon be followed by an apology. "I'm sorry for however I act. I love you more than words can describe," he would say. Emma's parents, Mark and Jill, said they tried to convince Emma to break off the relationship many times. Jill said he had a way of isolating her and making her think that he was the only one. The more they told Emma to break it off, the more they all butted heads. By the autumn of 2016, to everyone's unease, and Riley's relationship was still the same. Riley had graduated and was a freshman at Maryville College, about 30 minutes away, and 16-year-old Emma was in her junior year of high school. Around Halloween that year, in a desperate bid to help their daughter, Emma's parents decided to ground her, not allowing her to leave the house unless it was to go to school or cheerleading. They started monitoring everywhere she went and everyone she spoke to, and to their surprise, it seemed to have the positive effect they were hoping for. Mark said she was like her old self again. She would spend time with the family, socializing and eating dinner with everyone. Emma had even texted her friend Keegan to say that she and Riley were done for good after she had seen pictures of him with other girls at college. Keegan and other friends breathed a sigh of relief. As everyone expected, Riley did not take the breakup well. Friday, November 18, 2016. Emma was allowed out to go to a gathering at a friend's house. At around 11:30 p.m., her friend Zach arrived at the house. He was met by Emma, who quickly pulled him inside. She told him she had been receiving strange text messages from a number she didn't know. One of the messages said, "Come outside alone if you don't want to see a loved one get hurt. Go to your car with your keys. If you don't comply, I will hurt them." Emma thought it was one of Riley's friends playing a strange prank on her. She texted back, threatening to call the police. This didn't deter anything, and the messages got more disturbing. Emma then got a message saying Riley had been dropped outside the house. Emma and Zach ran outside, and sure enough, they saw someone lying face down in a ditch near the house. It was Riley. When the pair reached him, he was holding his head and seemed confused. He said he had been kidnapped and didn't know how he got there. Emma was crying and told Riley they had broken up and he needed to leave her alone. Dejected, Riley walked off down the street alone. He then called his friend Noah, telling him he had been kidnapped. Noah didn't believe a word. Emma, feeling uneasy, stayed with her friends that night. The following morning, just after 10 a.m., she drove home with her friend Haley, who lived close to the Walkers. While driving, they spotted a man dressed all in black, walking around on Emma Street. Emma dropped Haley at her house and drove back home herself. Emma was going to meet her mom Jill and started getting ready inside. But the mystery man soon came back and started ringing the doorbell and banging on the door. Emma was frantic and texted her friends. She also messaged the one person she believed would come to her rescue, Riley. She said, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He replied saying he was speeding over to help her. When Riley arrived, the mystery man had disappeared. Emma's friend, Haley, knew who the man was. She said there was no doubt it was Riley. This was also confirmed when she saw his car parked nearby. She even texted Riley asking what he was doing lurking around near Emma's house, but Riley denied it was him. Jill Walker returned home looking for Emma. She found her daughter and Riley talking in the front yard. Jill reminded him he wasn't allowed to come near the house and told him to leave. Emma was visibly shaken and was worried it could have been a burglar. Wasn't convinced and knew this wasn't a coincidence. But Emma reassured Jill. She knew Riley had nothing to do with what happened. After this incident, Jill and Mark were so concerned for their daughter, they took her to work on her Sunday morning shift. They waited until she'd finished and drove back home with her. Sunday night, November 20th, 2016. Everything in the Walker household appeared quiet and calm. Emma spoke to her friend Keegan about an assignment that was due and then headed for bed around midnight. A few minutes past midnight, Riley, who was back in Maryville, asked to borrow his roommate's phone. Using this phone, he called Emma. Riley alleged that during this call, Emma had told him she had no interest in getting back together with him, and the conversation abruptly ended. After this, Riley sent her countless texts and called around 40 times, leaving numerous voicemails. Emma didn't respond, and Riley eventually stopped trying to make contact. During the night, Emma's dad woke up after hearing what sounded like someone in the house and a door slamming twice. He checked around, looking in Emma and her brother Evan's bedrooms, but he couldn't see or hear anything and nothing seemed disturbed. Thinking he'd just imagined the sounds, he went back to bed. Around 6 a.m., Jill went into Emma's room to wake her up for school. Jill said her name, but Emma didn't respond. She reached out and touched her leg, but Emma still didn't move. When Jill looked at Emma's face, she said she knew she needed to call an ambulance. Emma was pale and her lips were blue. Jill checked for a pulse, but felt nothing. 16-year-old Emma Walker was dead. Police soon arrived at the Walker house. A small amount of blood was near Emma's mouth and it looked as though she may have vomited, possibly due to ingesting something. However, police noticed a small hole in the wall of Emma's bedroom, which pointed them elsewhere. It was a bullet hole. Someone had shot Emma in the head through the wall while she was sleeping. 2 shell casings were found outside the home, and police needed to work out where the second shot was fired. Walking around the outside of the house, police eventually found the second bullet hole at approximately the same height as the first. This shot was also fired into Emma's bedroom just by her bed. The gunshots had been fired from as close as 4 or 5 feet from Emma's bedroom window between 2:30 and 3 a.m. One bullet had hit her behind her left ear, likely killing her instantly, and the second bullet had lodged in her pillow. Whoever the shooter was knew the layout of the room and knew the position Emma would be lying in. Hundreds of tributes came flooding in, including many from Emma's ex-boyfriend Riley. The candlelight vigil was held at Central High, and her fellow cheerleaders released balloons in her memory at that week's football game. When police started interviewing Emma Walker's friends and family, the same name kept coming up over and over: Riley Gall. Some of Riley's friends became concerned for his well-being after Emma's passing. They told detectives a secret Riley had shared the day after he claimed he was kidnapped. Riley said he was now fearing for his life and had taken his grandfather's gun for protection. He then showed the gun to his friend Alex. Another friend, Noah, told detectives that Riley had asked him how to remove fingerprints from a gun, claiming he was asking for his roommate. Just a day before Emma was shot, Riley's grandfather reported this very gun as stolen. Riley asked Noah and Alex if they would help him get rid of the gun in the Tennessee River, as he feared it may implicate him in some way, even though he claimed he had absolutely nothing to do with Emma's death. Detectives brought Riley in for questioning. Police talked to him for hours that day. The more Riley talked, the more holes appeared in his story. He was elusive and detached, and the way he spoke about Emma did not match with his previous words. He referred to Emma as the girl and wouldn't use her name. Detectives said Riley was totally emotionless and disconnected, and his whole story seemed very rehearsed. "Oh, the girl, she texted me." "Which girl?" "The one that passed away." "Okay, which one?" "Emma." Despite maintaining he'd been in Maryville at the time Emma had been killed, cell phone analysis proved this to be a lie. His phone placed him on the freeway around midnight heading back to Knoxville from Maryville. It also put Riley in the vicinity of Emma's address at around 3:45 a.m., and she had been killed between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. Officers quizzed him on the gun and the information they had received from Noah and Alex, but Riley denied any of these conversations ever happened. Riley was the police's only suspect at this point, but they did not have enough to make an arrest. After he got out of the station, Riley sent Noah and Alex a text message and told them not to talk to the police again and instructed them to delete the messages from him. Little did Riley know, Alex and Noah were still talking with officers and had been the second they found out Emma had died. The pair wanted to support the investigation and knew they could retrieve the murder weapon. Police were initially hesitant and warned them about the safety risks of getting involved, but the pair were both adamant and determined to help. "I wasn't fearful of my safety. I was just fearful that maybe justice couldn't have been done if we made the wrong move," Alex said. They hatched a plan with the police to catch Riley in his own lies. Noah and Alex spoke to Riley and agreed to help him dispose of his grandfather's gun in the Tennessee River. The plan was the police would wait nearby ready to arrest Riley as soon as he pulled the gun out. The boys would text the police a code word signaling them to move in. Officers gave Noah and Alex wires and body cameras, and an intricate undercover investigation began. After this was filmed, the three made their way to the river with the gun that Riley had been hiding at his stepfather's house. When they got there, Riley took out the gun ready to throw it in. But thanks to Noah and Alex, the police were waiting. 48 hours after Emma had been found, her killer was in handcuffs. Riley Gall was charged with the murder of Emma Walker. In the boot of Riley's car, police found black clothing and shoes. The only conclusion they could draw was that it had definitely been Riley trying to get into Emma's house a few days earlier. The trial of Riley Gall began a year and a half later, and he pled not guilty. He chose not to testify, and his legal team called no witnesses to the stand. His team's line of attack was not to argue that he didn't fire the bullets, but to argue that it was a total accident that the bullets had killed her. They claimed he was just trying to scare Emma by shooting near her, without realizing the bullets would go through the wall. He wanted her to confide in him and ultimately resume the relationship. His lawyer said Emma saw Riley as her hero, and this was all part of his clumsy plan to pretend to save her, but it went horribly wrong when he accidentally killed her in the process. The defense asked the jury if they were to find him guilty of anything, It was reckless homicide, which carried a substantially lesser sentence. But the prosecution said everything pointed to this being an intentional act, and it stemmed from his anger at her not wanting to get back together with him. The jury found William Riley Gall guilty of the first-degree murder of Emma Walker, as well as stalking, theft, reckless endangerment, and being in possession of a firearm during a dangerous felony. In the state of Tennessee, a first-degree murder conviction carries an automatic life sentence. Riley was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 51 years before he could even be considered for parole. He will be in his 70s. In May 2021, was announced that Riley Gall was seeking an acquittal based on insufficient evidence. If the acquittal was not granted, he was seeking a new trial. A motion hearing was set for June 4, 2021. However, his request was denied. Riley's attorney said he plans to appeal the ruling. Emma should have graduated in May 2018. Her family accepted her diploma for her, and her cap and gown were laid out on the chair she would have been sat in. Since her death, Emma's family and friends continue to work hard to keep her legacy alive. Her high school has a scholarship in her name. Jill said Emma's love of animals and her dreams of becoming a neonatal nurse were such big parts of her character. The Walker family has since had a dog park and a neonatal intensive care unit patient room at East Tennessee Children's Hospital named after her. Jill said that she hopes people remember Emma by channeling her energy and making sure they are always kind to others. Case of Assunta Baudera. Rosario Porto and her husband, Alfonso Baudera, were wealthy individuals. Rosario's father served as an influential French consul, and her mother was an art teacher. Rosario followed in his father's footsteps. She became a successful lawyer. In 1997, she was appointed French consul. She inherited this post from her father. Alfonso was a well-known journalist. He and Rosario married in 1996, and they moved to a large apartment in an upscale area of Santiago de Compostela, Spain. Rosario had lupus erythematosus, which led doctors to advise against pregnancy. They decided to adopt a child abandoned by his parents and create a loving home for him. Adoption was challenging in Spain, so when they were in their early 30s, they chose to go to China for adoption. After navigating numerous bureaucratic hurdles, they arrived at an orphanage. Rosario immediately noticed a 9-month-old girl, and within 2 weeks, they resolved all issues to officially adopt her. When returning to Spain, the child's documents named her Assunta Fong Yen. This was notable since Assunta was among the first Chinese children adopted in the area. Initially, it seemed fortunate for her to join a respected and wealthy family, but unfortunately, this joy did not last long. Assunta was a highly capable girl. She excelled academically, studied multiple languages, practiced ballet, and attended music school. It seems that Rosario and Alfonso want to give her every opportunity to develop. On July 4, 2013, Rosario and her 12-year-old daughter, Assunta, went to the beach to cool off on a hot day. Assunta told a terrifying story about a man wearing a black mask and gloves who tried to strangle her the night before. The longer the girl talked, the more she lost control, and finally her mother cried. She knew about it, she was there when it happened, but for some reason she did not contact the police. On the night of September 21, 2013, at 10:30 p.m., Rosario and Alfonso were at the police station for another reason. They reported their daughter, Assunta, was missing for several hours. Then, Rosario recounted Assunta's story of the attempted attack from 2.5 months prior. This left them fearful that the attacker had returned and something terrible might have happened to their daughter. They were terrified she had been kidnapped. Alfonso was convinced she was no longer alive. They urgently pleaded with the police to take immediate action. In the early hours of September 22nd, 2 men were driving through a forest on their way back from a bar. Suddenly, the driver stopped, saying he noticed something unusual in the forest. He didn't understand what was going on, so he turned his headlights toward the forest and mentioned to his friend that he felt like someone was watching them. Despite this, he wasn't scared, likely due to the alcohol he had consumed, so he got out of the car and walked a few steps into the forest. In the light of the car's headlights, he saw something on the ground that looked like a doll. As he approached, he realized it was a girl. She was tied up, and her clothes were dirty. He checked for a pulse and found that the girl was dead. Then they quickly contacted the police. The police identified the body as Assunta, who had died just a week before her 13th birthday. While examining the area near her body, they discovered her mobile phone, which contained some disturbing photographs. There are several photos of she wrapped tightly, lying with her eyes wide open. Some forensic experts suggested her dilated pupils indicated possible drug use. Even more distressing were photos of the girl in revealing clothing with bright makeup, fishnet stockings, and posing provocatively on a couch. Her eyes remained wide open and her pupils were dilated. These photos later appeared on the internet, were widely circulated and making people angry about how a child was treated like that. Assunta's last day was described by her parents as ordinary. However, then little girl suddenly went missing and was found dead a few hours after they reported her disappearance. On that day, the girl went to visit her father, Alfonso, at his work and then hurried back home, so she not wanting to miss The Simpsons at about 7 p.m. After she returned home, Rosario, her mother, came back from work and saw her daughter in her room, where she had her books spread out on the floor for homework. Rosario didn't notice anything unusual and left to go to their country house, which was about half an hour away, to pick up bathing suits and other items for a planned beach outing the next day. Rosario returned around 9:30 p.m., and by then, Assunta was no longer in the apartment. Rosario became worried because little girl hadn't called or mentioned any plans to go out, which was unusual for her. Thinking maybe she had gone to see friends, Rosario started calling the girl's friends and Alfonso, but nobody had seen she. Rosario was the last person to see Assunta alive, making her one of the first individuals the detectives focused on, and she was questioned at the station. During her discussion with the police, Rosario recalled the incidents of July 4th, the night of the first attack. When they returned from the store that evening, Assunta closed the front door but left the key in the lock. Her mother didn't notice, and they went to bed. Around 3 a.m., Rosario was awakened by cries for help. Rosario rushed to her daughter's room and saw a large man pinning little girl to the floor, seemingly trying to strangle her. She attacked the intruder, but he was very strong and easily threw her against the wall. Fortunately, no one was harmed, and the attacker fled. Rosario described him as a strong, middle-aged man dressed in black, wearing a mask and gloves, so it is not possible to give a more detailed description. Assunta told her friend about what happened and even sent several photos showing red marks on her neck. Assunta's father, Alfonso, mentioned that little girl had struggled with depression for a long time and was taking medication prescribed by doctors. This was confirmed because Assunta talked to friends and shared her experiences. Recently, she had been speaking more positively about her situation, saying she felt much better. However, after Assunta was first attacked, Rosario did not investigate to find out what was happening to her daughter. She cited Assunta's fragile emotional state and said she feared contacting police would upset Assunta. This explanation was not very convincing. Over the years, Assunta had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital because she often expressed her life thoughts. Besides, she is very tired because of the overload of knowledge at school and extra classes. The nanny also said that Rosario had recently become very frustrated with Assunta as little girl was no longer meeting Rosario's expectations and her academic performance had declined. She had become somewhat of a burden, prompting Rosario to consider sending her to study in Poland. However, Rosario did not mention this to the detectives, so they decided to investigate Rosario's immediately. They were particularly interested in the country house Rosario visited on the day Assunta disappeared. As it turned out, when detectives got there, they found Assunta's body lying just 4 kilometers away. Rosario appeared surprised to see them. She was furious. She quickly headed to the second floor, clearly trying to hide something. When a detective checked a nearby trash can, he found a piece of orange rope inside, identical to the one used to tie Assunta's hands and feet. There was also a black mask and gloves. All these items were collected for examination, but unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found. The investigative committee conducted several autopsies. They did not measure the body temperature immediately, fearing it might compromise the evidence, so the exact time of death couldn't be determined. However, it was estimated that Assunta was killed around 8 p.m. The cause of death was suffocation. Her mouth and nose were covered with a soft object, likely a pillow, which prevented her from breathing, leading to unconsciousness and eventually death. In addition, an autopsy determined that Assunta had taken at least 27 lorazepam pills on the day of her death, 9 times the normal amount for an adult. Hair tests revealed this was not the first occurrence. Little girl had overdoses 3 months before her death, starting when the attacker first breaks into the home. It's important to note that overdoses of this drug can cause amnesia and loss of muscle control. The drug was used to treat anxiety disorders and insomnia. The police discovered that Rosario used it to combat depression, but it was not prescribed for Assunta. No one could explain why Assunta took the drug. According to Rosario, the criminals gave Assunta medicine so she wouldn't remember the incident. Detectives conducted a review of CCTV footage in the area to track Assunta's movements that day. Around 2 p.m., she visited her father, Alfonso. At 5:21 p.m., she returned home, and at 5:28 p.m. Rosario returned home. At 6:20 p.m., a gas station camera recorded a green Mercedes belonging to Rosario. She admitted the car was moving towards a house in the country. It was clear that besides the driver, there was a girl in the car identified as Assunta. They were heading in the direction where Assunta's body was later found. The new testimony completely contradicted Rosario's earlier statements, making she the primary suspect in the murder. Therefore, she was questioned again. Rosario's face showed fear and shame because she had let her adopted daughter go missing while she was responsible for taking care of the girl. Then, she offered a different version of events. According to her, they went out to get swimsuits together, but when they arrived at the country house, Assunta refused to enter with her. Assunta chose to stay in the car while Rosario took everything she needed and did some small work. However, this took longer than expected, and Assunta wanted to return home to do chores and rest. Rosario agreed and drove her daughter back. But she dropped her daughter off about a 20-minute walk from their apartment to avoid navigating the narrow streets. However, the police reviewed CCTV footage from the outskirts of Santiago, but found no evidence of Rosario taking her daughter back home. They only saw footage of Rosario leaving her country house alone around 9 p.m. Her story is full of controversial and contradictory details. She appeared to look at the detectives with arrogance, displaying coldness and showing no regret over the loss of her child. She persistently insisted that the large man in black was involved in the incident. When the police interviewed the Bot-era family's neighbors, one mentioned hearing screams at night in July when Assunta was first attacked. He also observed something unusual. Even though the attacker entered an area where dogs lived, the dogs were silent, indicating that the attacker was very familiar with them. All in all, everything seemed suspicious, making them even more suspicious that Rosario and Alfonso were involved in the murder of their adopted daughter. The police considered different theories about the first home invasion. Some thought it was fabricated by Rosario, while others suspected it was the parents' first attempt at murder. Few believed an outsider was involved. On September 24th, Rosario and Alfonso held a funeral, during which they behaved oddly, even taking a selfie in front of the coffin. Due to inconsistencies in her testimony, Rosario was arrested after the funeral. By then, detectives had discovered what might have been the motive behind the crime. Witnesses came forward with information about incident from 9 months prior to the tragedy, and this may have been the beginning of the bloody end. In January 2013, Rosario started a relationship with a realtor named Manuel Garcia, whom she hired to sell real estate. Manuel was married and made it clear he would not leave his family. He considers the relationship with Rosario to be nothing more than an affair. Rosario was fine with this, and their secret relationship continued. During this time, her relationship with her husband, Alfonso, quickly deteriorated. She finds Alfonso boring and considers him a failure who overestimates himself. She described him as insensitive, while her lover, Manuel, was the complete opposite. After Alfonso finds messages from Rosario's lover on his wife's phone, they divorced in February 2013. Rosario and her daughter Assunta continued living in the apartment. She maintained her business and visited a country house. Custody of the daughter, Assunta, was shared, and both parents have the right to see the little girl. After Assunta's parents divorced, she lived in both her father's and her mother's houses. Many observed that she was always close to her mother, while her relationship with her father was not as warm. However, her father made efforts to improve their relationship. He also repeatedly told his ex-wife Rosario that they would be forever tied together through their adopted daughter. Is it possible that because Rosario wanted to completely cut off contact with her ex-husband, so she will cause the innocent child to leave forever? It is known that earlier in the summer, Rosario had to end her relationship with her lover, Manuel. Alfonso took advantage of the opportunity, he convincing Rosario to end her relationship with Manuel in exchange for his help with their daughter while she was in the hospital. And Rosario agreed to this request. However, it was revealed that on September 21st, Rosario broke her promise. She's spending most of the day with Manuel and only returning home in the evening. This is very suspicious because soon after, Assunta was killed. During the investigation, numerous assumptions were made, including one significant point emphasized by the defense. They argued that male DNA was found on the clothes Assunta's, indicating a man's involvement. While it was considered possible that the mother was not involved in the crime, this scenario was deemed unlikely. Police have stepped up their investigation, collecting documents for analysis, focusing on identifying male DNA on Assunta's body. Several options were considered during the investigation. At first, Alfonso was suspected, but then all attention turned to Manuel. However, he had an alibi and had no motive to harm Assunta, so he was quickly dismissed as a suspect. Surprisingly, the DNA was identified as belonging to a stranger named Ramra, a Colombian citizen who lived in Madrid, about a 6-hour drive from Santiago, where the incident occurred. This may seem strange. When questioned, Ramra fervently denied any connection to the case, claiming he had never been to Santiago and had no involvement in the murder. Indeed, Ramra had an alibi. He was having dinner at a restaurant in Madrid with his girlfriend and was captured on CCTV footage there. Why had Assunta been taking prescription drugs in the months leading up to the incident without any prescription? Further examinations revealed that only a portion of the DNA traces found belonged to Ramra. The lab staff suggested that the match could be due to poor quality samples or contamination. There were even suggestions that someone might have intentionally tampered with the sample's DNA to mislead the investigation. At this stage, many questions remained unanswered and detectives considered even the most unlikely scenarios. Rosario and Alfonso seemed indifferent to what happened to their adopted daughter. Rosario was the last person to see Assunta alive, and the press speculated that she could have acted alone. Despite her fragile appearance, but investigators doubted she could physically manage Assunta's body. Using cell phone towers, police tried to determine the whereabouts of Rosario and Alfonso at the time of the incident. On that day, their phones were turned off. This makes the police even more suspicious of them. However, Rosario explained it was a coincidence, and their phones just run out of battery at the same time. They don't have any bad intentions. After talking to a local pharmacist, who was also a friend of Rosario's, they discovered that Rosario first contacted the pharmacist on July 5th, the day after an intruder broke into the house and attacked Assunta. After that, this drug lorazepam was purchased in large quantities by Rosario. Considering all the circumstances, the detectives decided to arrest Alfonso Becerra. Some of Assunta's teachers had noticed unusual behavior in her. One day, Assunta attended her violin lesson with her father, Alfonso, and she seemed unable to control herself. Alfonso explained that his daughter was just under the influence of allergy medication. The teachers observed that she was usually very reserved and did not share her problems. The drowsiness incident occurred repeatedly, but the parents always had excuses, typically citing her health condition. The teacher was suspicious and distrustful of the girl's parents. When the police interviewed Assunta's teacher, she described Assunta's symptoms and behavior, which matched many side effects of the medication. 2 days before the tragedy, the last suspicious incident happened. On that day, Rosario informed the teacher that her daughter couldn't attend class due to a severe reaction to prescribed medications. After hearing this, the detectives were convinced that the adoptive parents knew about the medications and attempted to poison Asanta. Although Rosario and Alfonso were divorced, but Alfonso was determined to reconcile with she. In June 2013, 3 months before the tragedy, Rosario experienced a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. During this time, Alfonso moved back in, feeling optimistic as his wish to reunite with his family seemed to be coming true. During this period, Rosario ended her relationship with her lover. Alfonso visited her in the hospital and cared for her after her discharge. It seemed like family matters were improving, but later it was revealed that she had lied, she continuing her affair and meeting her lover on the day of the murder. Given the new information, the investigation believes that Alfonso sought revenge. Perhaps he wanted to cause Rosario more pain than he had to endure from her betrayal. This could explain why the orange rope ended up in the trash at the country house. It was simply tossed there by Alfonso. However, why was Rosario so alarmed when the police arrived, and why did she immediately check the trash? She likely knew about these items and was an accomplice. The police have discovered a new clue. Whenever Alfonso was at home with Rosario and Asanta, the little girl be drugged with lorazepam. However, Alfonso refused to comment on this, claiming he was not guilty. After the arrest, Rosario's behavior was unstable, alternating between hysteria and depression. Meanwhile, Alfonso remained quiet and calm. He constantly trying to reassure Rosarios by saying they just needed to love and support each other and that everything would soon be over. Despite his soothing words, the police noticed his cold demeanor. Eventually, the police found the storage media Alfonso used. It turned out that the hard drive on his laptop had been completely replaced. Experts discovered that over 500,000 photos and videos had been stored on it, likely compromising material. The police also found that he had an unhealthy interest in Asian girls on his social media page. Evidence showed he had dozens of interactions and correspondence with Asian girls, and according to investigators, the photos suggested these girls were minors. Additionally, he often showed interest in adult Asian women with very youthful appearances. Later, a woman who owned an escort agency approached the police. She confessed that Alfonso was a regular at her establishment, always requesting only Asian women and insisting they dress as schoolgirls. Even his wife was aware of this preference. Photos of the murdered Asanta in revealing clothes made the situation even more serious. The prosecutor focused on how the seemingly calm and quiet Alfonso had cruelly treated his adopted daughter Asanta. The charges suggested that Rosario and Alfonso were criminals covering for each other, with both involved the Santa's death. What could have motivated the crime? Rosario and Alfonso refused to cooperate with the investigation and wouldn't communicate without their lawyers. Later, on their attorney's advice, they completely stopped commenting on the tragedy. Forensic psychiatrists were crucial to the investigation. They analyzed Rosario and Alfonso behavior and identified them as narcissists with personality disorders. It appeared they adopted Asanta to present a loving family image, pressured by Rosario's parents. Sadly, Asanta became a mere pawn for them, and once she was no longer needed, they first exploited her and then decided to eliminate her. A 15-year-old acquaintance of Asanta testified for the prosecution. Although Alfonso claimed he stayed home all day until the evening on the day of the murder, this was proven false. The girls saw him around 6 p.m. near Rosario's house, a fact later confirmed by camera footage. Alfonso was captured on camera at 9 p.m. after Asanta had disappeared. These conflicting details added to the evidence against Rosario and Alfonso. The trial was highly controversial, with even the judge's conduct coming under scrutiny. Many suspected he sought fame, suspicions that were later validated when he authored a book about the case after the trial concluded. Relatives and neighbors of the Bot-era family watched for years as the foster parents tried to create the best environment for Asanta. They are financially well-off, ambitious, and have a tough personality, but those close to them noticed their devotion to Asanta. Many people still believe that the trial's outcome was a miscarriage of justice. In court, Rosario and Alfonso maintained their innocence. Alfonso remained calm and reasonable, while Rosario often cried, became hysterical. She puzzled in her testimony in justifying his behavior with the effects of the drug. Rosario's cousin testified at the trial and shared some new information. In 2011 and 2012, Rosario's parents both passed away suddenly at home. Their deaths were suspected to be under unusual circumstances. The cousin believed that Rosario was involved in the murders of her parents and daughter to inherit the entire property. However, the defense attorney rejected these claims. Rosario's mother passed away at the age of 77 and her father passed away at the age of 88. Both passed away peacefully from old age in their sleep in their beds. Although doctors found nothing unusual, their bodies, like Asunta's, were cremated, making it impossible to verify any unnatural causes of death. Meanwhile, the prosecutor contended that Rosario and Alfonso were true sociopaths. Alfonso was apparently a pedophile who drugged his daughter and chose to record these incidents. Asunta posed a threat of exposing them, leading to the decision to eliminate her. This theory was supported by numerous photographs and evidence indicating that Alfonso had an unhealthy obsession with young Asian girls. It is likely that Rosario was complicit in these activities or was at least aware of them but chose to protect Alfonso's wrongdoings. Alternatively, Rosario might have seen the girl as a burden and decided to eliminate little girl with the help of Alfonso. On October 30th, 2015, the court found Rosario and Alfonso guilty and sentenced each to 18 years in prison. After beginning their sentences, they both appealed, but their appeals were rejected. On November 18, 2020, Rosario was discovered dead in her prison cell with a belt around her neck. This was her third trial in her life. Alfonso remains imprisoned and maintains his innocence. Hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail made a grisly discovery at the Los Coyotes Indian Reservation on February 16, 1986. At the edge of the campsite, a woman's body, which was partially decomposed, was found. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office arrived on the scene right away and got to work on the investigation. While at it, the San Diego County Sheriff's Office soon got a call that would completely change the situation. A man in comparable state was discovered 14 miles away from the female victim. Both murder victims were covered up in layers of clothing and heavy jackets. Because of the striking similarities between them, investigators knew they had to identify both bodies before their killer could be found. In both of these cases, law enforcement has withheld a great deal of information. To maintain the integrity of the investigation, the cause of death of the man who was discovered 14 miles away was never disclosed. Detectives had a hard time moving either of the cases forward. There was a dearth of evidence, and what little evidence the San Diego County Sheriff's Office did possess was kept from the media. Before interest waned, the Jane Doe's murder was briefly covered by the media. Although the San Diego County Sheriff's Office was aware that there was a family out there looking for their loved one, the female victim's case would go unsolved for decades, until in 2023. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office began using genetic genealogy. The Jane Doe's hair was sent in for testing on websites like 23andMe and GEDmatch. Detectives were able to create family trees and locate relatives using this DNA analysis, census data, and other public information. After identifying the victim's family tree, all that remained for the investigators to do was to locate the missing link. Following the submission of her DNA, law enforcement quickly identified the Jane Doe as Claudette Jean Zabulski Powers. Claudette Jean would have been 24 years old when she was savagely murdered. Her life before her disappearance in the early 1980s was pieced together by detectives. She had been married with 2 kids. She and her husband relocated from their home in Michigan to Washington. By 1983, Claudette had filed for a divorce and had found a house in San Diego County for her and her 2 daughters. However, the death of her father in 1984 brought tragedy to the Powers family. Claudette didn't take her father's death so well. She loved her father so much that when he died, she felt lost. According to family members, Claudette was last seen or spoken to at her father's funeral in September 1984. She completely vanished from the surface of the earth. Her family claimed that they never stopped trying to find her. When it seemed difficult to locate her, her siblings hired a private investigator to help search for her. Still, it yielded nothing. They then only hoped that one day she would come back home. She was never formally reported missing, and her family was unaware that she had passed away for all these years. Despite the fact that she has now been identified, the investigation is far from over. Authorities must now reconstruct Claudette's life from September 1984 to September 1986. According to some reports, Claudette may have worked as a waitress in Escondido, so anyone with information or who may have known her has urged to come forward. It has been extremely difficult for her family. Her sister Laura Fries told the media in a statement, "If you know of my sister, you have worked with her, you have seen her. It would have been back in 84, early 80s to 85 when she come up missing. Please contact the San Diego Sheriff's Department to tell them what you know about her. Somebody knows what happened." The investigation is still ongoing. Neither the John Doe nor Claudette's cause of death have been disclosed by the San Diego County Sheriff's Office. They have stated that Claudette died violently and that they are searching for a male suspect. Additionally, they want to find out who killed the man. They claimed that the man was about Claudette's age, in his mid-20s, and that they were both wearing thermals and other camping-appropriate attire. They had both passed away for about 2 weeks before their bodies were discovered. No other personal items or bags or purses containing camping supplies were discovered. They would have needed a vehicle to travel to the crime scene because it was far away. There are currently no John Doe sketches or other details that could be used to identify him. After Claudette Jean Zabalski-Power's DNA matched with Laura Fries, her youngest sister, who has been worried about her for years, Laura remembered her sister in an interview saying, "Claudette was a very devoted and thoughtful mother. She adored her children dearly. She cherished her family dearly." She further added that their mother can pass away peacefully when the time comes, knowing that her oldest child has been located. Right now, there is a $1,000 reward for any information that results in an arrest of Claudette's killer, so anyone with information is urged to call the Sheriff's Homicide Unit at 858-285-6330. In the last days of 1973, Deborah Kurb was a 17-year-old student at Fresno High School. Her friends and teachers described her as a cheerful and outstanding student. On December 31st, 1973, Deborah hosted a small get-together inside her family's residence located on the 4000 block of College Avenue in Fresno, California, while her parents were away in Pismo. To welcome the new year, Deborah Kurb and her friends, which included her boyfriend and another couple, engaged in puzzle solving while listening to music. When the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of the year 1974, the small party ended and the young host bid her friends farewell. Tragically, Deborah would only have a little glimpse of a potentially fruitful year. On January 1st, 1974, in the late afternoon, Deborah's parents came back home to find her lying dead with her own leotard wrapped around her neck. Tragedy was reported to the police. An investigation into the case was launched, and detectives started looking into persons who had last seen Deborah alive, specifically those who had attended her party hours earlier. A young man named James Arthur Blaylock, who was 17 years old at the time, was quickly suspected by authorities. James was one of the party attendants and had come along with his girlfriend to the gathering. He was said to have driven the others home when they left Deborah's residence. Authorities believed that James Blaylock might have committed the murder. They were of the opinion that he had gone back to the Kurb family home, using a spare key he had known the location of to get inside and rape and kill Deborah. Unfortunately, though, that was only a theory. There was no concrete proof to convict James for the crime. In 1974, due to a lack of supporting forensic equipment, detectives were unable to prove what they so firmly felt to be true: the fact that 17-year-old James Blaylock was a deadly killer. The Deborah Kurb's case, however, slowly became cold. Many years later, in 2006, the Fresno County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation and attempted to run some of the biological evidence collected from the crime scene through recently developed DNA technology. This time, there was a success. James Blaylock's DNA matched the sexual assault kit. To further confirm this, Deborah Kurb's body was also exhumed in 2006 so that a DNA sample from her could be obtained. The samples were then submitted to the Serological Research Institute, a non-profit forensic lab in California that soon confirmed James Blaylock as the culprit investigators have been looking for all these years. James Blaylock, who was incarcerated at the time, was subsequently interviewed by Fresno County Sheriff's detectives Marty Rivera and Jeff Kurtzen. He denied killing Deborah and having sex with her. Blaylock soon changed his account after the detectives confronted him with a DNA match of his semen. He claimed he and Deborah had consensual sex but never killed her. The case was brought by the district attorney's office, but it had to be dropped for lack of supporting evidence. The case went cold again for another 15 years. In December 2021, Sergio Toscano, a current cold case detective and former Fresno County Sheriff's officer, revisited the Deborah Kurb's case and asked for a repeat DNA test on the leotard used to strangle Deborah. James Blaylock's DNA results were obtained again. His DNA was confirmed on the sexual assault kit and also appeared on the leotard. After this discovery, in 2023 detectives tried to get in touch with James Blaylock, but they soon learned that he had died in the hospital in 2022. He was 66 years old at the time. Blaylock had a significant criminal history over the course of his lifetime, which included violent crimes and becoming a registered sex offender. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.